Have you ever seen a billionaire slam his fist on a polished table, his eyes burning with rage, because no one in the room could understand his daughter's desperate hands moving in silence? That very moment is where this story begins, and trust me, you will want to stay until the end, because the twist will leave you stunned. But before we go deeper, let me remind you, if you love stories that touch your heart, inspire your soul, and remind you that kindness still exists, then don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right now to Goodness Corner. Because today's story is about love, pride, anger, and a simple act of courage from someone no one ever expected. The restaurant was buzzing with the soft clinking of glasses and murmurs of elite conversations, the kind where men in tailored suits and women in glittering gowns filled the air with the smugness of privilege. At the corner table, the billionaire Richard Maxwell sat, known across the country for his ruthless business empire. His aura commanded silence wherever he went, but today, something was different. Beside him sat his young daughter, Emma, a fragile girl with sparkling blue eyes that carried an entire ocean of loneliness. Emma had been born deaf, and though Richard provided her every luxury in life, he could never protect her from the cruelty of silence when society refused to understand her. He had requested a simple thing, someone in the restaurant staff to know sign language so that his daughter could order her favorite dessert without feeling isolated. But when the manager shook his head nervously, admitting no one on staff could help, Richard's fury exploded. His fist came down on the table with such force that nearby guests flinched. No one. In this entire high-class place, not a single soul speaks sign language, he roared, his voice echoing like a thunderclap across the hall. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering under their breath, others rolling their eyes, thinking the billionaire was overreacting. But inside Richard's chest, it wasn't just anger, it was the pain of watching his daughter's face fall, her small hands trying to speak a language no one around them understood. Emma tugged on his sleeve, her little fingers moving, asking him to calm down, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. To Richard, she wasn't just his daughter, she was the only family left after his wife's tragic death. He had vowed to give Emma the world, yet here he was, powerless in front of something so simple, communication. The manager stuttered an apology, sweat forming on his brow, but Richard's rage only intensified. You charge thousands for a meal, and yet you cannot even make a child feel seen. His voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Waiters stood frozen, some biting their lips, afraid to step forward. And then, when the entire restaurant held its breath in that uncomfortable silence, a soft, trembling voice broke through. I can. All. Heads turned. It was not the manager, not the head chef, not one of the men in black uniforms. It was a waitress, her apron slightly wrinkled, hair tied back in a simple bun, eyes carrying both fear and determination. Her name was Lily. For months, she had been working double shifts to pay her college tuition, unnoticed by most, treated as invisible by many of the very people now staring at her. But what they didn't know was that Lily's younger brother had been born deaf too, and she had learned sign language just to make sure he never felt left out in a world that often overlooked people like him. Richard's piercing gaze snapped to her. You? He asked, his tone still rough, half disbelief and half demand. Lily nodded quickly, her voice almost trembling. Yes, sir. I know sign language. And then, without hesitation, she turned to little Emma, her hands moving gracefully in the air, forming signs that were both familiar and comforting. Emma's eyes widened, her face lighting up with the first genuine smile of the evening. She responded instantly, her small fingers dancing in excitement, and for the first time since they walked in, her silence was filled with joy. Richard froze, watching this exchange. The storm inside his chest calmed as he saw his daughter laugh, a soundless laugh, but the most beautiful music to his ears. The restaurant, once filled with tension, now watched in awe as the little girl and the waitress carried on a conversation in their own secret language. Emma signed quickly, telling Lily how much she loved strawberry cake, how she wished more people understood her, how she sometimes felt invisible even though her father was the most powerful man in the city. And Lily, patient, kind, warm, nodded and signed back, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. Richard leaned back slowly, his anger melting into something else. He wasn't used to being humbled, but here he was, humbled by a waitress in a wrinkled apron who had done something none of the rich, educated staff could. He cleared his throat, his voice lower now, almost hesitant. "What did she say?" Lily smiled softly, her eyes shining. "She said, she feels happy now. She feels seen." For a moment, Richard couldn't speak. His hand brushed across Emma's hair, and he swallowed the lump in his throat. Around them, the guests who had once looked annoyed now shifted in their seats, some even embarrassed at their earlier indifference. But not all of them. In the corner, a group of businessmen smirked, one of them whispering just loud enough for Richard to hear, "Imagine, Billionaire Maxwell brought to his knees by a waitress. How pathetic." Richard's jaw tightened, but before he could snap back, Lily stood taller than she had all night, her eyes locking onto the men with quiet strength. "It isn't pathetic," she said firmly. "It's human." Her words cut through the arrogance in the room like a blade. Richard looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, not just as a waitress, but as a young woman with courage carved into her soul. Something shifted inside him that night. But that's only the beginning of this story. Because what happened after this dinner would change not only Lily's life, but Richard's entire empire. Stay with me, because Chapter 2 holds the twist you won't see coming. And before we move on, don't forget, if this story has touched your heart even a little, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Goodness Corner so you never miss more stories of kindness, courage, and the moments that remind us of what truly matters. The days after that night carried a storm Richard could never have predicted. The world whispered about the scene at the restaurant, the billionaire's rage, the waitress's courage, and the little girl whose smiles silenced the room. But what no one outside knew was how deeply that night had touched Richard himself. He couldn't forget the way Emma's eyes lit up when she spoke with Lily, nor could he ignore the echo of Lily's words, "It isn't pathetic. It's human." For the first time in years, he felt ashamed of how often he had built walls of money and power while forgetting that some things, like compassion, couldn't be bought. The very next week, he returned to the same restaurant, not with fury, but with purpose. Lily nearly dropped her tray when she saw him standing there in his crisp suit, but before she could stammer, Richard extended an envelope. Inside was a scholarship fully paid, her entire college tuition, covered. Her hands shook, her voice caught, but before she could protest, Richard smiled faintly. "It's not charity. It's gratitude. You gave my daughter something priceless." From that day forward, Richard funded free sign language training for every staff member in his restaurants, and even launched a foundation to support families with deaf children. Emma, once so isolated, now had a new world opening around her, and she begged her father every week to visit Miss Lily, her new best friend. For Lily, life had transformed overnight. She was no longer invisible, no longer just a waitress. She had become the spark that reminded a billionaire, and everyone watching, that kindness is stronger than pride. And if this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Goodness Corner, where every story reminds us that goodness still exists.